Joining us, crime reporter Pat Lalama, also with us, psychotherapist and author of the book Till Death Do Us Part, Robbie Ludwig, and joining us as well, Denver, Colorado defense attorney David Beller. Pat, I'll start with you. Nicole Kessinger, what more do we know about her at the center of this explosive interview?
Well, first of all, wow, what a shocker. Chris Watts lied to her. A co-worker at the petroleum company, she described that they would see each other in the break room when she would go in to put her lunch in the refrigerator, and thought he was attractive. She said he was soft-spoken. He came into her office to introduce himself, and she said he seemed like a very endearing father, a kind man who said he was going through a divorce, and that was it. They started a 2-month affair, saw each other about 4 to 5 times a week. That's quite a lot if you're a separated father, and she bought into it until you know the rest.
Yeah, and here's, Pat, I'll stay with you here as I read this next quote. So finally the realization hits, and she says, when I read the news, I found out he's still married and his wife's 15 weeks pregnant. So we get this revelation. Where does she take the story next? Well,
she actually does the right thing. First, she starts pressing him. She's pressing him. This is actually before it was discovered that he was going to be arrested. And she's struck by the fact that he does not seem at all concerned. All right, if you're talking about a potential psychopath here, he feels nothing. She even says that as she presses him about it, he tries to change the subject. So ultimately, when she figures out what's going on, she goes right to law enforcement. The right thing to do for her.
Yeah, and as it's unraveling, Robbie, so family's missing. He's not emotional, according to Kessinger. You know, as Pat said, she's grilling him. He's trying to change the subject. And here's a quote from her. It got to a point that he was telling me so many lies that I eventually told him I did not want to speak to him again until his family's found. Let's let that sink in a minute. How does someone process this? That someone she's talking about having a future with, at the back of her mind, she's thinking, he might have killed his family in cold blood? How do you process that?
Well, I think first it's denial, right? You want to deny somebody that you're attracted to or falling in love with or in like with is capable of that kind of heinous crime. And then there's a sense of betrayal. How could this person seduce her and act available and then have these big lies? And in some way, she wanted to make sure that she was not considered a part of this crime at all. So smartly so, she separated herself from this guy, reported him, and basically said, I have nothing to do with this. This man, there's something wrong with him. He lies all the time. He's suspicious. So her instincts were right. But there's a feeling of betrayal and probably fear. Hey, what happened with my judgment? That I wasn't able to assess that this person was a liar or potentially dangerous.
And Robbie, what do you do? She knows she's on the grand stage, because everybody's got questions about her. How do you process that side of it? You've not only been duped, but the world is watching you after you've been duped.
Well, she has really a chance to make it right, and that's what she's doing right now. She's basically making a statement. Now I see in retrospect that Chris was a liar, that the whole relationship was based on lies, and I don't want any part of that, so I'm going to speak out and let everybody know what they need to know so that they can have more information.
Hi, David Beller again with us. A bit of news today. We're learning Chris Watts' parents are going to be making a statement. Will that have any impact on what happens at sentencing on Monday?
It really won't. The judge here, remember, only has one option in front of him, and that is life in prison without the possibility of parole. And so the sentencing hearing is for the victim's family, for Shanann's family, to be able to speak to the judge, to be able to talk about and have sort of this therapeutic session where they can be heard regarding the loss that they have had. And Mr. Watts' parents may have some concerns about this plea, but ultimately, that's a decision that is made by Mr. Watts, by Mr. Watts' team, and then the sentence decided by the judge, and that's all.
Got it. Pat, you know, at the end of this interview, as Kessinger, the full realization hits, you know, she says she felt sad, and then she really turns and says she never doubted and still does not doubt he killed his family. I mean, again, you just think of her life, let's say in a 36-hour span, goes from maybe a future with this guy to fully believing he killed them all.
I'm sure it's upending in so many ways, but I want to say one thing. I don't think that there's any of us on this earth who has not been duped by someone. And you know what? You can be the smartest, most intelligent woman on earth and still fall into this trap because it's a matter of the heart, which is a lot of times, I'm sure Robbie will attest, because she knows, is a completely separate thing from our intellectual state. And I don't want to make any moral judgment about her. It's not an issue as far as I'm concerned. It was her life and her decision. But I do have to say this. If people start believing, oh, well, there's the motive. No, I'm not a psychologist, but I've covered enough criminal cases. This was not a motive for him. This was maybe a catalyst, but this man he wanted to be completely unencumbered. And again, to use the Scott Peterson analogy, the only way he knew to do it so that he could sleep at night was to wipe everybody off the face of the earth as if they didn't exist. Believe me, he had no plans of marrying this young lady or being with her, even though he told her to get an apartment for them.
Yep. Okay, couple of things to that point. I'll say men can be duped as well.
Yep.
Just as easily.
Yes,
Let me say
yes.
that. And number two, we're going to talk about that. And we'll ask Robbie, hold your thought, Robbie, motive or not. Is Nicole Kessinger motive for this? Pat says no. We'll see what Robbie says coming up in a little bit. Let's bring back our esteemed panel. Pat Lalama's back with us, crime journalist, and so is Robbie Ludwig, a psychotherapist and author of the book Till Death Do Us Part. Let's hit that line again. Pat has already weighed in on motive. Robbie, I'll ask you, is Nicole Kessinger, the mistress, motive for Chris Watts murdering his family?
I agree with Pat. She is not a motive. She may be a trigger. And Chris could have had the idea, the fantasy, that if he were to choose Nicole and choose a new life, then he would be happy, then he would be saved, then his life would feel meaningful the way it really should. But it sounds like Chris is the type of philanderer who chooses women and then gets very disillusioned when he doesn't get what he wants out of the relationship and then strays. And worst case scenario, kills to get out of a situation that doesn't work.
And Pat, I'll let you finish your point. Let's make the point. The fact is, according to this interview with the Denver Post, that Nicole says he wants her to help find him an apartment. They're talking long-term plans. But again, you guys are on the same page, and I'll let you weigh in, Pat. This is not motive.
No, it's absolutely. Look, here's the thing. A psychopath, do I know if he's a psychopath? I don't know, but let me just use the term loosely. Someone like him didn't wake up one morning and become a man who could brutally and heinously murder his wife and put those two beautiful little children in oil vats. That man was made a long time ago. That seed was planted a long time ago. And if you look at a longer history, and we can do that over time, maybe on Monday, there were a lot of failures in his life. I don't think he achieved what he ever wanted. He had all kinds of financial problems. There are allegations that he even had an affair, or at least a tryst with a man. I think he was just a confused, unhappy, miserable person that it led to some sort of psychosis. And like Robbie said, I think she was a trigger. Oh, now I'll really be happy. But you know what? I'll bet Ms. Kessinger is thanking her lucky stars. She never had a key to any apartment that belonged to Chris Watts.
Wow, what a point that is. Let's read another quote from this interview. Again, that's the back and forth, and Pat, I'm glad you said that. We see these cute little girls. They ended up, and it's horrific to even say, in oil vats. Yeah. Yet, here's the quote, and Robbie, I'll start with you, about Nicole being wooed by this guy, that he's a soft-spoken man, he's a good listener. And then the quote, when it all comes to pass and realization hits, that if he's able to lie to me and hide something that big, what else was he lying about? And this is not, by the way, to beat up Nicole Kessinger. It's more of just when we're all duped like this, what do we do with it, especially when it's on such a grand scale like this, Robbie?
Yeah, well, first of all, it takes a while to get to know somebody. And the truth of the matter is sometimes somebody with an antisocial personality is easier to be around than regular people because their goal is to charm and seduce. That is their anesthesia. They don't want people knowing that they have aggressive tendencies, so they hide it. And Chris is somebody, if you hear how people describe him, he did not present any aggression at all. He just presented his very sweet, charming, endearing side of his personality. And just to state again, if he does have antisocial personality or sociopathy, everything they do is for themselves. They use every single person in their life. So they may use a relationship to get out of a miserable relationship, but everything is for their own personal gain.
Here's another aspect. I think we have a side-by-side picture of Nicole Kessinger and Shanann Watts. Does it strike either of you? There's a similar look, let's be honest. And what the mindset is to that. Robbie, I'll let you start.
Yeah, no, this was Chris's do-over. He clearly had a certain type. He was drawn to this woman, Nicole, and he thought, oh, I got it wrong with Shanann, but this time, this woman can make me happy. I'll get it right. She will love me in the right way, and she will make me into the man that I need to be, unlike the first mistake that I made.
Got it. Pat, your thoughts on that as we see the pictures?
I want to throw something in here that's a little bit associated with it's regarding Shanann. And I do not want to disparage her life in any way. And she just seemed like an absolute queen, a princess of a mother, of a human being. I mean, honestly. But I have to tell you, I have been suspicious all along of how happy that marriage really was. I don't find it particularly, I don't want to use the word normal, but it seems a little off that she spent so much time videotaping, posting hours and hours, telling long, elaborate stories about her life to a camera to post for who to see. I almost feel like that poor woman was trying to convince herself she was in a happy marriage, but knew perhaps it wasn't. I'd love to know what Robbie thinks of that.
I think that's a really strong possibility, and I think perhaps both Chris and Shanann had the same wish, that if they chose each other, then their life would be right. They would be loved, they would be successful, and we know what the reality was underneath that wish.
Wow. Guys, thanks again so much. Pat LaLama, Robbie Ludwig, appreciate it.